Here's a little more review for you guys on the sine-cosine graphs called sinusoids. I'm going to start out today by just drawing two cycles of a sinusoid. So that's one, that's two. All right, so two cycles of a sinusoid. The vertical values of the sinusoid, there are maximums, there are an infinite number of maximums because this cycle just repeats itself over and over again. This same interval would repeat over here and even going backwards. So there's an infinite number of maximums, and they're one full cycle, one full period apart. And then there's the minimums. There's an infinite number of minimums. Halfway between the maximums and minimums, there's a horizontal line that cuts the whole function in half. That horizontal line is called the axis of the wave. So exactly halfway between our maximums and our minimums are the axis of the wave. So that means, and I'll come back to this slide in a second. If we had a maximum at the point 3,7 and a minimum at the point 5, -2, if we wanted to find where the axis of the wave was, I'm just using the abbreviation AOW for axis of the wave. It's halfway between y and the two y coordinates. So it's halfway between 7 and -2. And if you want the number that's exactly halfway between two values, you just take the average of them. And the average of two numbers, you add them together and divide by 2. So y equals 5/2. That's our axis of the wave. So if you know how high your maximums are, and you know how high your minimums are, or low your minimums are, I should say, the axis of the wave is smack dab in the middle. You can take the average of the two y coordinates to find out your axis of the wave. So now let's look back at our graph. This axis of the wave, it's also the same distance from the maximums as it is from the minimums. That distance is called the amplitude. That distance is called the amplitude. So the amplitude is how far the maximums are from the axis of the wave and how far the minimums are from the axis of the wave. Since the amplitude is a distance, it's always positive. The amplitude is always positive. So if we look at this example, there's a couple ways to go about this. One way is find the distance between 7 and 5/2. 7 minus 5/2 is 14/2 minus 5/2, not 10/2. My apology. 14/2 minus 5/2 is 9/2. So that's our amplitude. Or the distance between -2 and 5/2, so 5/2 minus -2. So 5/2 subtracting a negative is adding a positive. plus 4/2 gives us that same 9/2. Another way to look at amplitude, the amplitude and the other amplitude together gives us the total height. The total height from 7 to -2, the distance between 7 and -2 is 9, so the amplitude is half of 9. Any of these three methods work. So our vertical manipulations of a sinusoid, we have the maximums and minimums, the highest and the lowest we can get. Between them, exactly between them, is the axis of the wave, which is 1 amplitude away from the maximum, which is 1 amplitude away from the minimum. All right, that's it for the vertical manipulations. Have fun.